Hi there folks, I'm Anthony and I'm in the Innovations team at Exeter College. Now today we're going to take a look at virtual lessons and scheduling them via Teams. So in this session we're going to take a look at scheduling a lesson, getting set up, managing a lesson, running a lesson, sharing an interactivity, and then finally how to end a lesson properly. So this is roughly about a half-hour session, and at the end of it, for those of you who are collecting Microsoft points in the Microsoft Educator community, I will put a code up as well at the end. Please do try not to cheat and skip right to the end just to claim the code. It'd be great if you can get some insights from the video as well. Hopefully you'll find it useful, and if you need to follow anything else that we're coming up with here at Exeter College or any of our other insights, then you can find my Twitter handle in the top corner of the screen here. So please feel free to connect and find out what we're up to. So starting a meeting. Now we've got a couple of different ways we can go about this. First and foremost, we're going to need to find the location we're hosting our meeting. So we're going to be doing this in the environmental management course. And from there, then I'm going to be carrying out the meeting, or this lesson is going to take place in the general channel. Now I could do this in any of the channels, and I could use this as a means to separate out my lessons by different topics. So there are lots of different ways you can organize that. And then there's a fundamental choice between whether we want to meet now, so do the students already know this meeting is going to be happening at a certain time and that I'm going to be inviting them into it literally as it happens. So if that's the case, within our team here we're going to go to the meet button at the top and we're going to drop that down and say meet now. So if we're meeting now, what that will do is that will spin up an instant meeting here, so it will fire up the camera and the microphone, allow me to name my meeting accordingly and whatever I want to call it. So here I would call it perhaps lesson 2, and that would be carbon cycles. So we can define it there. I think it's really important that you do name it because it makes it much easier to come back to later on. And then when we're ready to join that, simply hit join now. Now the other way of doing it is if I were to go back to the previous screen, I can schedule a meeting instead. And here again I give the actual lesson a title. If I could spell. There we go, so carbon cycles. Now, required attendees, I don't need to add anyone in particular, but I can use this to bring in external parties as well, so if we have any guest speakers, then I can bring those into here as well. When's it going to happen? So it's going to be at 5:30 tonight, and the duration of it as well. Which channel is it going into? So you see it's automatically put this in here for me. Location is going to be online, so I don't need to add anything there. But if I were in a hybrid learning environment, for instance, where some of the students will be in class, some will not, then I can put the actual room location in here as well. And then details for the new meeting. Realistically, this is your meeting agenda that we're familiar with from normal Outlook meetings. However, when it comes to a lesson, you might want this to be your lesson outcomes or the aspects you're going to be covering in that particular session. And then when you're ready with that, simply hit send, and that will send it out to everyone within that channel to notify them that it's going to be taking place. And you'll see then I've got a scheduled meeting coming up at 5:30 today, and to join it is simply a case of clicking on it and then going to the top corner where it says join. Next up then we have the actual kickstarting of our meeting, so we're going to be hitting the join button just now. Now before you do this, just a word of advice: when you are setting up your remote sessions and your Teams-based training, I would really strongly advise that you turn up to, or you're ready to join your meeting ahead of everybody else taking part. So if you allow yourself about 15 minutes, if you can, that gives you time to make sure things like your camera are working, that your microphone is working correctly, that you've got your team set up in the way you would like it to be, and that your meeting is kind of set up in the way you would be ready to accept students into them. So if you click join, so first and foremost we're going to get our camera settings. So here we can decide whether or not we're going to be using camera or microphone, and we can turn those on or off accordingly. We can also choose our background blur here, so at the moment I've just got a multicolored effect on here. but I can then specify what I want to do. Now, whether you have a blur or not is really entirely up to you, but I think there are circumstances where it's probably best applied. So where we have, for instance, meetings taking place where you are hosting it from the staff room, then you need to factor in the fact that you're going to be able to see everything going on behind you. So I would always advocate in those kind of scenarios putting a background in of some sorts. Other scenarios where you can bring this into play are if you're delivering maybe something that is external focused. So where I do EdTech demos and showcase demos, for instance, which are representing the college, then I've created a number of backgrounds that I can use for those, which just give it a little bit more of a professional feel. And also on some of those, I've included things like a Twitter handle as well, so you can identify sort of who I am and quickly get in contact. In your own class, though, you might want to consider doing a background for your own training session. Now bear in mind here it's going to look like it's flipped because we're looking effectively at a mirror of my screen. So you'll see on the right the image is actually the right way around. On the left hand side within here it looks like it's the wrong way around, but when it shows to your learners, they will see it exactly as you intend it to be seen. So within here I can put maybe a background for my lesson, I could put some QR codes within there, or I could put links to resources and keep those prominently behind the video screen at all times. So it's another great way of using a background. Okay, so then when we're set up with that, this is why I say take a little bit of time to be ready to join the meeting, because we will want to check our settings, we want to check that the microphone's connected. So here I'm going to use the USB headset that I'm using, that's absolutely fine. Speakers, again, I'd like all the sound to come out through the earphones, so that's fine. Microphone is set correctly, and then camera-wise, which camera do I want to use? So at this point I would turn on the front-facing camera or the HD webcam that I've got here, so then you can see me jump up on screen, and you can see the preview there taking place. So when we're ready to join now. Okay, so we've joined our meeting. Some of you will notice that there is a clear continuity error in this particular video from the last one. If you can work that out, then that's very good. Now, while we're in our meeting here, we can set up our meeting options, bearing in mind we haven't yet let any of our students into this session. So we're going to go to More Actions, and here we can set up our meeting options. So this is a really important one just to have a brief overview of. You may not wish to change anything, but here you can specify who can actually bypass the lobby. So when we say lobby, when you first start off those sessions, you can set it so that you're the only person who can kickstart this meeting. If it was set any other way, then anybody can effectively start and join that meeting before it's ready to go ahead. So if you say only you, this allows you to then admit people when you're ready to have them join that session. You can specify here that you'd like people to always be able to bypass the lobby. You can also specify whether or not you want the attendees to be announced when they join or when they leave your session. And also here you can specify who's able to present during your meeting as well. So within that you can choose again whether it's yourself, whether it's just people in your organization, whether only specific people you've invited, or again whether only you are able to make a presentation on here. I would say, generally speaking, I would leave that for everyone, so anyone who wishes to present is able to, so it creates a much more free-flowing lesson then that way. And then another really important part to consider here as well is around this allowing attendees to unmute, particularly when they've got their microphones. It's a great meeting etiquette control to have in place here to stop your learners from kind of shouting out and sort of engaging perhaps when they don't need to, or when you'd rather they didn't, if you're trying to give your presentation to everybody else. So you can turn this on and off as you see fit, and you can come back to that later on as well if you want to just then allow free-flowing conversation. So if I save that, that updates my meeting. That will specify to people now starting to join, which they should be doing in a few minutes if we were to set this at the right times. Then they will start asking, and you'll see prompts pop up on screen for people wanting to join that session. Okay, so those are our meeting options. There are a few other things in here we've already talked about, blurring screen and so on, so that's worth noting at this point. This is also where you'll find your live captioning. So if you do need those for yourself, then obviously you can turn those on, but it's also worth advising your students that they can turn that on here as well. The recording is something that you should absolutely do, at least from an Exeter College point of view, before your meeting starts, so that you capture the whole, the entirety of it. And you can do that via the Start Recording button here. Additionally, there are things around your meeting details and meeting notes if you're using this to maybe capture minutes or activities that are going on into a notebook that's linked to the meeting, but it's not essential to use those elements. And then finally at the bottom, if you are trying to give a lesson and there are difficulties with the quality of the video, or if you're in an area where you haven't got a sort of high-speed internet connection, so you're not on broadband or you're running this maybe on 4G connections, then you may want to turn off incoming video. That one's one to use, I think, sparingly and cautiously, but if the lesson needs to happen, something needs to take place, but the quality of the video is affecting that, then you can disable the video itself and stop all those incoming video feeds, which just reduces the amount of bandwidth that's needed to hold the lesson. Okay, so those are your meeting details. Next up, we'll have a look at the other various parts of the interface. Now, before we progress any further, what I'm going to do is I am going to switch my background to a different effect. The reason for that is just because obviously it's reversed, and the way I'm recording this video, you're not going to see it from the student point of view, you're only going to see it from mine, so it might become a little bit distracting. So instead, we will find another location we can jump to. So let's jump to the Bridge of the Enterprise. Okay, right. So from here, just to talk through the rest of the interface elements then. So you've got your participants showing in the top here. So when you click on that, that shows you everybody who is currently in this meeting or is able to take part in this meeting at the moment. I'm the only person here. And then suggestions. So these are other members of this particular team or this classroom group who probably should be in the meeting and joining it but are not yet. So I can request to join and that will send them an immediate prompt, an invite to join in. And if they wish to use that to join, they can do. Equally, I can bring someone in directly. So if I have an external contact, for instance, that I want to invite into this meeting, then I can do so here. I don't know if this is a real person, but I imagine probably not. So I can invite someone in, a guest speaker perhaps from outside, to come and take part in our lesson, and they will get the invite in the same way. Now you could also do that to start off with by adding them into your meeting invite in the first place. Okay, so also while I'm here, within the participants panel, you'll see alongside each person there is a little ellipsis of 3 dots. At the moment I can only do something against my name, so I can spotlight myself. So if there are lots of video discussions going on, somebody else is sharing a screen for instance, I could set it so that the spotlight or the key attention is always on me or always on a particular person. So I can do that for any of the students once they've joined. And equally under here there'll be a few other options around control of the microphones and audio. Again, bear in mind in earlier parts of the session we talked about the mute all function. And again, we can do that up here. So if we look against participants, the 3 ellipses against all of our participants, we can then enable or disable the allow attendees to unmute. We can go forth and manage a few additional permissions, which I don't tend to use very often myself. And then we can also download an attendee list. So I would say this is a really useful one to do at some point during your session. It doesn't have to be right at the start, but I would certainly make sure you do it before you leave the meeting, otherwise you're not going to be able to get back at this again. And what that will do is just simply, if I click this, it will bring in a report. It will create a report then of everybody who attended the meeting and the times they attended it as well, and whether they were there for the whole duration. So it's a really useful insight to show you whether or not they were actually there and engaged. Okay, so that's our participants. The next one to have a look at in here is our conversation. So Alongside our meeting and our lesson, we can actually have a text-based conversation, so we can type in messages here. So put a message out to our learners. I'm just saying just about to start, and those messages can then be liked, or we can express whether we like or hate something, or dislike, or whether we find it funny. So we can use the emoticons that come up on there. Learners are also able to save the message, so they can flag it to come back to later on. They can translate it if maybe it's written in a language that isn't their primary language or their first language. There is a translation tool built into this. And equally, there is the immersive reader as well, which can be used to analyze the chat as well. So there's some really great accessibility tools within there. But why do we need the chat alongside this? Well, fundamentally, the chat is going to bring in a very new way of working alongside video. So it can be quite tiring to deliver a Teams lesson, particularly if you're trying to do that for the entire hour of a traditional classroom lesson. So what chat allows you to do really is to split out the way you deliver the content in that session. Do you need to be stood up for an entire hour, or in this case sat down for an entire hour, talking at people in your class, or does it need to be a bit more interactive than that? So you could, for instance, go back to your screen. You could say at a certain point, so halfway through the lesson, perhaps you've finished doing your presentation. At this point, I'm then going to turn off my microphone. Bring my microphone back on as well, so you can see then how we can use this for some quite interesting setups for remote learning. Within the chat, we've also got the ability to add some formatting, so we can do that here and highlight text and so on. We can specify upload, so we can add files into the chat as well to make those available as resources for everybody taking part. And then we've got a few things around the slightly more fun side, or to put some emojis in there to express emotion or sentiment. So if someone's going through a presentation, then they could post in a smiley emoji to say that they agree with it or enjoying it, or a sad face if they're not. But particularly useful if you're engaging with younger years or primary years as well is to bring in some of those elements, maybe around the stickers and the GIFs, so you can add things like praise, if people have made a good comment on there, or they've expressed an interesting opinion, then you can use some of the stickers and so on in here within the chat to do that. And the great thing about this is that everything you do in chat is then stored alongside the meeting inside that team channel. So if anyone comes back to this later on, if they weren't able to access the meeting at the original time, they can not only watch back the video, but they can also take part or review what actually went on in the chat as well, so they can get that discussion piece too. And then the next part we'll come on to is raise your hand. This is tied with the show participants. So raise your hand is a really useful facility here. As I click it, you'll see it adds a little orange number against the participants. So this is showing that there is one person raising their hand and wanting attention. If I bring the participants panel up then, so you'll see then alongside each of the students, as they raise their hand throughout the session, you'll get the little yellow hand show up. This is showing that they want attention or maybe want to speak. If their microphone is muted, you can then unmute them, or you can allow them to unmute themselves to come in and join in on that conversation. So there are two ways you can use this. One is just to identify that someone has raised their hands, they would like to engage with the class, they'd like to offer an opinion or answer a question. The other way of using it is actually for a vote or poll. So by asking people to raise their hand at a certain key point, if you look at the hide participants parts, or show and hide participants button at the top, it will show a number for the number of people who have raised their hand. So it's a very quick way of casting a vote. When they're finished, when they've asked their question, please ask them to lower their hand, otherwise it can get a little bit confusing as to who is still waiting for their question or time within the meeting. Okay, so those are the key things. I would certainly advocate at key stages during your lesson to either keep the conversation panel open or to have the participants or to flick between them as you give your presentation discussion, because they do offer some great functionality there, particularly when you're starting a Q&A session. Okay, so that's the key elements of the interface. We'll next go on to sharing. Now we're going to take a look at sharing through the Teams lesson. So really simple way to do this is to jump up to the top of the screen. You'll see a share content button and we're going to click on that one. Now what this then opens up is something called the share tray. So this is a collection of all the different resources that I have running on this PC that I can share out with anyone at this time. So we've got, first and foremost, in the column on the left, we've got desktop screens. So I've got 3 screens connected to this PC at the moment, and I can use any one of those to share content out. Now, word of warning on that is that anything that appears on that screen will effectively be broadcast out on that session. So if you have an email that pops up halfway through or something confidential, then of course that is going to be broadcast out for everybody to see. I mention that as a warning because I have seen that happen. And I have seen that actually cause a little bit of upset for those involved in it as well. Thankfully not something I have done, but it is certainly one to be cautious of anyway. So the probably more appropriate way of doing that is to then use something that you've got open in a window instead. So these are all the programs or apps that I have open. Now I wouldn't advocate normally that you have this kind of setup and have this many programs running at any one time, but it is a useful way of doing it. So traditionally, what we would do is we would say our presentation is running in the background. We know we want to give that one, so here we have a presentation that is running on Modern Teaching and Learning. So if I call that one up, what's going to pop up on screen first of all is because I've not launched the presentation yet, I've just got the file open in the background. This is open on my desktop PC. So here is the presentation that I'm ready to share. Now, I tend to prefer to leave it in slideshow mode ready to go because I just find that experience is a lot better for everyone to take part in. But I know it's not something that everyone feels comfortable in doing there. So I'm just going to, if I start this slideshow now from the beginning, what that will then do is on my second screen, which I'm sorry you can't see at the moment, it is put my presentation up on screen. That I can then advance through those slides one by one. So you'll see as I'm doing it on my second screen, it's also updating the slide that I've got on my first screen here as well. So you can see that change is actually happening and taking place. What it doesn't show you though is all the animations and the extra video stuff that's going on around that as well. So I'm just going to escape that, come back to my presentation. So that's one way you can do it, and that's a traditional PowerPoint. What of course you will notice when we're doing that is if we got our PowerPoint open, we've got a little box as a reminder just in the bottom corner here to show us that the call is still in progress. But I can't see any of the video, I can't see any of the interactivity, and I can't engage with my students without going back to the meeting again. So I can click on the box, of course, and I can jump back to the meeting and I can see the video wall of everybody taking part, and then go back to the screen again if I want to carry on the presentation. But it is not, I don't think it's the best experience. It's certainly quite functional, and it's what we're all familiar with anyway, delivering a presentation. Now, another way we can do this though, if I cancel that share and I start a new one, so I'm going to start a brand new share with share content here. Let's give a bit more room on screen to go around with this one. So we've looked at desktop, we've looked at window. Incidentally, when we're doing that, there's also a tick box here that's important to include, which is include computer sound. If you don't tick that box and you've got any videos or audio that you want to play out from any presentations or YouTube videos or anything else going on screen, your learners and participants on the other side of the call will not be able to hear it. So you need to make sure that's ticked, otherwise they won't hear anything. They'll see your lips moving, they'll see the video happening, but they won't hear it. Okay, so it's really important you include that. Now, the second way of sharing a PowerPoint is with this PowerPoint function built in. So a PowerPoint viewer has been built into Teams. So if I then go through and pick one of my presentations that I've worked on recently, I can either call them up from here, or I can click on Browse, which allows me to then upload a particular presentation or pick something else from my OneDrive. But I know the one I want, it's there, it's the remote worker guide. So I press that, and then I'm hoping what will then happen is the presentation will load up. It's about 15 megs, so it might take a minute or two for that to actually upload. Hopefully not too long. While that's doing it, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll pick a slightly smaller presentation. So if we look at the one we were just looking at a moment ago, this modern teaching learning one. So what this is doing, and this is why file size is important here, is it's going to take that presentation and share a copy out live across this session. Okay, so it could be a presentation I own, and that's why if you've got a 600 megabyte presentation, I really wouldn't advocate doing it this way. But if you've got something that's just slide based with a little bit of animation, maybe a few YouTube linked videos in there as well, that's perfectly fine. But what you'll see here then is within our screen we've got our presentation on the main part. My video feed is still present at the bottom, and alongside that I would also see the video feed of anyone else in the lesson as well. But I can jump between my chat and my participants really nice and easily here then, so I can go back and forth between this. I can still take part in the chats that's going on within this session, but of course it means I can carry on giving my presentation. Now the great thing about that then is I can carry on doing this, but I can engage and I can ask for questions and I can answer anything that needs to be answered while we're going through all of this. The other great thing about this particular interface is that I can prevent participants from advancing as well. So if I put a little cross mark through this eye icon here next to stop presenting, then whatever pace I go at is the pace that the whole class moves at. So if I go back and forward, the class will go with me at that same pace. If I take this out, then as I advance, somebody in the class, so a learner who wants to maybe progress a bit more quickly, can go at their own pace and can reach the end before I finish teaching maybe the second or third slide. So if you don't want people to read ahead, you don't want them to sort of get the sneak preview of all the answers if you've put those on the second slide, then make sure you activate this function here to prevent people from moving on. When you're done with that, really simple to stop presenting, just hit the stop presenting button. It will tell you it's going to end for everybody, and that's absolutely fine. And there we go. Okay, so the final part I want to talk to you about is Whiteboard, and this is another new feature within Microsoft Teams. So if we share content again, the last one here is Whiteboard, and this is going to spin up an interactive whiteboard session that we can use then. I get a choice whether I just want to be the only person who can edit it, which is certainly one benefit, or I can do it collaboratively, so everyone who's on that call can take part in the collaborative exercise that is creating that whiteboard. So I didn't choose, the countdown finished, everybody can now edit this whiteboard. So while I'm here, we obviously we see the video feed in the corner. We can again have the chat on the right hand side. Again, we can show the participants, and again people can use the raise hand function to ask for attention or ask a question. So all of that's still there, while we get the ability to use a number of different coloured pens. Now if you've got a touchscreen device with a pen, it's obviously a lot easier, but you've got some basic tools here around using different coloured pens to draw and highlight out key points on screen. If you need to erase a line, you can do so. It works in the same way that ink works within OneNote, for instance. I'm not going to draw anything particularly complex because I'm not a very good artist. We can also add in text, and then we can move these around as well. So the great thing about this is that we've got an infinite canvas that we can play around with. We can move our content around. all being well. We can also then resize it. As well as that, we've got the ability to put notes up. So one of the things you lose with a virtual session over a traditional classroom is some of those activities, like being able to just take a group and put post-it notes up on various parts of the wall around the room to ideate different concepts or different thought processes. Well, now you can do exactly that with these notes. And the great thing is, again, because it's an infinite canvas, you can give a separate part of each wall to a separate group. So you can say, for instance, this is the badly drawn green team, badly drawn blue team, badly drawn red team. So they can put all of their ideas up into those various areas. If I can move them around, there we go. So it's a really great way of replicating that kind of real world thing in a virtual territory. There are a few other things I can do here as well. So I could also, when I'm finished, export the image to a PNG, which means I can then share that whole image back out with everyone again. Or if everybody has the desktop app, then I can trigger this to open in the desktop app, which gives me a lot more functionality. So I'm just going to continue where we are for the time being. And that fundamentally is just showing the whiteboards there. I have got some other sessions on Whiteboard if you'd like to learn any more about that. So there we go. If we stop presenting, and then that's the end of the sharing session. So the last point for me to go through is really, what do we do at the end of a meeting? How do we close down? So thinking back to some of the other things we've already talked through, first I would go to my participants panel, and don't forget we've got that attendee list, so it would be worth grabbing a copy of that one for yourself. So you've got then a roundup of who was in the meeting. And then next up, we're going to effectively leave or end our meeting. Now if we leave, just bear in mind that will leave the session for you, but it will make sure that session is running for everybody else who's still there. So that is the kind of the virtual world equivalent of just getting up and walking out of a meeting. It does also mean you can come back to it later. So if you leave, you can then rejoin that meeting a little bit later in that session if you wish to. But really what you're wanting to do at this point is to end the meeting. So if you click the drop down next to leave and choose end meeting, this will end the whole meeting for everybody. Now the key thing to bear in mind there, and the reason we're doing this, is because you may not want that session to carry on when you've gone. It's a great sort of I suppose a risk in some ways from a classroom management point of view. At very least, if you've got your kind of unattended class taking place in a virtual world as well, then that is going to potentially cause may cause problems, or it may have conversations that you don't necessarily want happening at the end of the meeting. So by ending it, you're in control, you can stop the meeting. The recording also stops at that point, so you can then have that uploaded to stream and make it available to other people. If there needs to be any further conversation, then that's also absolutely fine. That can happen in the chat window within Teams, or if needs be, an additional meeting or additional session can be set up. But if you get the main part out of the way for what this session was intended for, and then use the rest of the Teams functionality then for the chats. So I'm going to end this one. And there we go. I'm back to my main screen again now, and that concludes our session on Teams remote sessions. So that concludes today's session on Microsoft Teams and using Microsoft Teams for virtual lessons. Hopefully you found the content we've gone through today really useful. As I said right at the start, if you do want to connect and you want to find out a little bit more about what we've been up to, then you can take advantage of the Twitter handle in the top corner here, so do feel free to connect. Alternatively, take a look through our YouTube channel for more videos in this series as well, and to get some other insights about the kind of digital tools and resources that we're using here at Exeter College. As promised, as you'll see on screen here as well, is a code that you can redeem in the Microsoft Education Center as well to claim a few additional points and to add to your profile.